is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Well, it is the worst ever gun outrage in the history of the United States of America. We are talking about 58 people dead and over 500 injured. The crime committed by a 64-year-old called Stephen Paddock, and he was in the 32nd floor of a hotel firing down on a rock concert at which 22,000 people were attending. No one quite knows how many rounds he fired. What we do know was there were up to 10 guns found in his room, and these, of course, were assault rifles, which are used, or supposed to be used, for hunting. But, of course, as we all know, in America, you can buy these very high-velocity hunting rifles that can fire 20 shots and more on one magazine. Let's listen to what Donald Trump, the US president, had to say in response to this outrage.
Last night, a gunman opened fire on a large crowd at a country music concert in Las Vegas, Nevada. He brutally murdered more than 50 people and wounded hundreds more. It was an act of pure evil. Melania and I are praying for every American who has been hurt, wounded, or lost the ones they love so dearly in this terrible, terrible attack. Hundreds of our fellow citizens are now mourning the sudden loss of a loved one, a parent, a child, a brother or sister. We cannot fathom their pain. We cannot imagine their loss. May God bless the souls of the lives that are lost. May God give us the grace of healing, and may God provide the grieving families with strength to carry on.
We don't yet know the motivations of this man, Stephen Paddock, who did this and committed this outrage, but I should say that ISIS have claimed that he was one of their soldiers. They claim he converted to Islam a couple of months ago, and indeed they did put out a video, ISIS, in May, where they were calling for a lone wolf to launch such an attack in Vegas. But none of that's been confirmed, and in fact the State Department say they're pretty sceptical about these claims. Either way, the really big issue, and this is not a new debate in America, because just think about this. In Nevada, you don't need a permit to buy a rifle, shotgun or handgun, nor do you need to register the weapon or be licensed to own one. Nevada allows open carry without a permit. So, actually, you could have a concealed gun, under your jacket, and in theory walk into a casino in Las Vegas. They might ask you to leave, but in theory that is what you can do. Where checks are made is if you go to a gun store and order something, they will, before you can come and collect the weapon having purchased it, carry out a mental health check with the authorities. But of course, none of this is in place for private sales of guns that take place between individual citizens. Now, there was a referendum measure in Nevada that said that for private sales to take place, there too a mental health check and perhaps other checks should take place. But nothing came of it, despite the fact people voted for it, because it was considered to be unenforceable. So we don't yet know where these guns came from, but he could easily have bought them privately from somebody else. Now, I have not been traditionally a fan of President Obama, as you know, but let's just listen to what Obama said back in January 16 when he was talking about trying to put through a series of measures for tighter gun control.
Anybody in the business of selling firearms must get a license and conduct background checks or be subject to criminal prosecutions. We're also taking steps to make the background check system more efficient. We're going to hire more folks to process applications faster, and we're going to bring an outdated background check system into the 21st century. Number 3, we're going to do more to help those suffering from mental illness get the help that they need. So, high-profile mass shootings tend to shine a light on those few mentally unstable people who inflict harm on others, but the truth is that nearly 2 in 3 gun deaths are from suicides. Number 4, we're going to boost gun safety technology. Now, today, many gun injuries and deaths are the result of legal guns that were stolen or misused or discharged accidentally. In 2013 alone, more than 500 people lost their lives to gun accidents, and that includes 30 children younger than 5 years old. Now, in the greatest, most technologically advanced nation on earth, there is no reason for this. We need to develop new technologies that make guns safer. If we can set it up so you can't unlock your phone unless you got the right fingerprint, why can't we do the same thing for our guns? If there's an app that can help us find a missing tablet, which happens to me often, the older I get. If we can do it for your iPad, there's no reason we can't do it with a stolen gun. If a child can't open a bottle of aspirin, we should make sure that they can't pull a trigger on a gun. All right?
Well, that was President Obama speaking back in 2016, and I tell you what, like his politics or loathe them, think he was a good president or a total failure, he was a very good speaker, wasn't he? Of that, there's no doubt. And I have to say that when I listened to that stuff from Obama back in 2016, a lot of it seemed to make sense. The idea of doing background checks, the idea that you could actually, encrypt a gun so that, your own thumbprint has to go on it for it to work. So all of these things I thought were quite sensible. None of this was he able to get through legally. And that is because there is a big traditional debate in America that it's part of their constitution. It has been from day one of the USA, the right to bear arms, to protect yourself. And people felt that what Obama was doing actually was beginning to impinge upon their traditional constitutional rights. I have to say, if you look at the numbers, it does really make you think. Because so far, in 2017, there have been 46,500 reported gun incidents across the United States of America and 11,500 deaths. I know we're a much smaller country, but our numbers are in the low hundreds. So clearly, if there are more guns around, more people are going to use them, more people are going to get killed or injured. To me, I just think that it's completely ridiculous that I could go online and find someone down the road who's got a series of assault rifles, which, as I say, could carry a magazine clip with 20 rounds of high velocity, and I could just go down there and buy them straight off him and stock an arsenal, if you like, in my home. Those guns serve no use. The reason you would buy them legitimately would be for some forms of hunting, but you don't need 20 rounds when you're out hunting. So I've thought for some time myself, actually, that some degree of sensible control probably is needed. And I say that as somebody who understands, the constitutional requirements that Americans feel. I also, myself, shoot. I like using guns, but at least in this country we have a reasonably sensible system of enforcement in place. So please, let me know what you think on this issue. I'm particularly keen to hear from people from the USA. I know we have a lot of people in the States that do listen to us and do follow us. So if you think there should be more controls, then please call me on 0345 6060 973. Perhaps you think it's too late and there's not much that can be done. Text to 84850 and please tweet through your views using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. I'm going to take my first caller this evening, and it's Valentine, who's calling from Bromley. Good evening, Valentine.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. I just wanted to say that the question about gun control, which has been raging for yoinks, is probably, in my opinion, the wrong way to look at it.
Okay.
Whether you have more control or whatever we can think would be the most rigorous of controls, the fact is people can pass these controls. People can pass these, if you like, references at the point of purchase. And during their life, anything can change that makes them snap. So, for example, this guy today, from what I've seen on the news, is a perfect perfect case study. There's nothing in his whole life that suggests that if he went to buy a gun yesterday, he wouldn't have been able to legally purchase them, even with the most strenuous of controls. He's a retired accountant. The Constitution allows people to bear arms. So the controls, in my opinion, don't do anything. It assumes that people will never snap and therefore commit carnage like this guy has done.
I do take that point, Valentine, and interestingly, I've got a tweet come in from the USA that says, absolutely no need for more controls. Criminals don't abide by the law, so why wouldn't they just get a gun illegally? So I do understand all these arguments that people can be good, people can snap, that actually it's only bad people, whether they are bad to begin with or become bad, that will use guns in a bad way. But Valentine, would you not agree with me that it's pretty ridiculous that you can buy, a highly powered assault rifle repeating with 20 rounds or more in its cartridge? Isn't that just wholly unnecessary?
No, I absolutely agree. It's a joke. These are weapons of war. There's no need or place for them in just general society. But the reason this will never change is because the Americans, they value their right to bear arms on this old premise of, to protect themselves if the government would ever take arms against them. On top of that, the average American, I don't know any stats, but a lot of Americans are very paranoid. There are things in their day-to-day lives that make it almost impossible for them to release or to get rid of this romance with guns. I mean, it's to the point that, guns are almost trivialized. The way that, if you were a parent in this country, you might teach your daughter or your son a bit of financial common sense by the time they get 13. In America, people go to the gun range. They teach them how to use guns at 13.
Oh, no, there is a massive, Valentine, there is a massive cultural difference here. Absolutely, you're right about that. Valentine, let me just ask you very quickly, do you think anything will change as a result of this Vegas atrocity?
I was speaking to this about my colleague today, and I said it will never, ever change in a million gazillion years. And the reason being is because the average American, on the most part, they want the right to bear arms. And, forget people always vilify like the National Rifle Association, but they forget that, it's the individual that pays.
They see it, Valentine. They see it as part of their liberty. They see it as their protection against an overburden, against the state that at some point might want to impose controls upon them. Valentine, interesting phone call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:15. It's the worst gun atrocity in the history of the USA. There are 58 dead so far and over 500 wounded, many of them very seriously indeed. And it does reopen the debate that has been going on, in America anyway, about whether some more controls are needed over the sale of guns. And lots of opinion. And I've had some texts and tweets from America, but anybody in the States that wants to ring me and talk about their constitutional rights and how they feel, if you call 0345 6060 973, you will go to the front of the queue. And I get here, anyone who calls themselves a responsible gun owner must take responsibility and back tougher gun laws. Nigel, if this wasn't ISIS motivated and he is a lone wolf, do you still class this as terrorism? My thoughts are that anyway, it invokes terror, so surely he is a terrorist. I'm sure that Las Vegas is in a state of genuine terror tonight, so I'm sure that's right. My next caller is Ali, who's calling from Beckton, never called the show before. What are your thoughts, Ali?
Hello, Nigel. How are you doing?
Good evening. Well, I'm okay, but as I've said already, Ali, I understand to Americans, the right to bear arms, to protect themselves, is absolutely part of who they are as a country, and I get that, and that will never change. But I do honestly wonder about the sale, whether it's through a shop or whether it's me to you, for argument's sake, of high-velocity hunting rifles that fire a lot of rounds every minute.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think one thing, just a general overview in terms of my view on guns, is I absolutely support certain control measures like mandatory training programs and gun safety technology. But one thing I just wanted to mention was that, the notion of the gun culture that you've talked about in America, and I have never really seen it anywhere else. I went to Israel, And in Israel, in public, guns are very visible. You'll see soldiers who are carrying their weapons constantly close to them. You'll be in a random bar or a hummus shop or whatever it might be. People will have guns. And sometimes it makes you feel nervy that, there's so many weapons here. But the difference is, for me, is that in the Israeli mechanism of thinking, the American, is that Israelis recognize that these are not toys, that these are serious, deadly weapons that are designed to kill people. And, soldiers in Israel are not allowed to be more than an arm's length away from their weapon. The culture and the way they view weapons is very different. And it's something that I just kind of wanted to highlight, especially, in the recent light of where the debate in America is so centered around culture. And a lot of Americans are very...
So do you think, Ali, the Americans... Are you saying that you think the Americans have a sort of lackadaisical approach to this?
Yeah, I think the problem is there is not enough of a recognition of the danger of what these things do. Okay. I think, to be honest, the debate often gets clouded in a sense of culture and pride, and so is nationalism. And, even you've got bodies like the NRA that are even protesting against the possibility of mandatory training, which for me is quite dangerous. If you're going to buy a weapon like this that's capable of killing God knows how many people, why is it not acceptable for you to take any form of mandatory training, even short courses, something simple to at least understand the mechanisms of a weapon, what it does? It's, these are, as I said, these are not toys. These are serious weapons that,
you've made that point well, Ali, and I listened to you talking about, you see people on the streets with guns, police, etc. Well, yesterday in Marseille, there was an ISIS attacker stabbed to death 2 young girls, one 17, one 20, outside the train station. Awful. But there were armed soldiers and there were armed police there who shot him dead before he could have killed any more people, which undoubtedly he would have done. And I have to say, Ali, and this may make you uncomfortable, but I want to see more police officers on the streets of the UK carrying guns. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I can completely understand where you're coming from, but the danger that I feel is that if police get weapons, and the fact that at the end of the day, if a police officer perhaps loses his weapon and it falls to the wrong hands of a gang or a group who can maybe, get into the kind of the technical aspects of that weapon, digest it, replicate it possibly. My worry is the proliferation of arms on UK streets. And I'm from Manchester originally, a city that was plagued by gun violence not long ago. And I mean, I completely understand those concerns in terms of safety and terrorism. I think that, the recent, the London Bridge attack highlighted that,
didn't it ever? Our brave boy in blue there with his baton taking on these three, had he had a gun or even a taser, he could have stopped them in their tracks. Ali, thank you. Very thoughtful, interesting call. And I've got Timmy calling from White City, but he's an American and he's visiting London. Timmy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. So you're an American visitor.
I am.
No, I apologise. You're an American visitor. How do you feel about your Second Amendment rights?
Oh, don't even get me started about that. I'm really emotional about it. And I used to be, my husband is a Brit, and we've debated for a long time about this. And I used to say, bad guys have guns, so why can't I keep guns to protect my son, to protect my family in case there's a need? And he used to be completely against it. And, he made his points. And now I see why. It's only a few people that mess it up for the rest of them or us. You could drink and drive for as long as you could, but few people who abused that made sure there would be checks and balances, and you couldn't drive if you had a few drinks or more. So the same thing has to apply here. It used to be a right. It was in a completely different circumstances when people had distrust when it came to their government and they felt like they had to protect themselves. It's a different era. We claim that we have the best democracy out there in the world. It's unbelievably shameful that we would allow someone to just walk into Walmart or just go online and meet somebody and buy a gun enough to kill hundreds. It's I can't wrap my brain around the fact that we haven't done anything about it so far.
Timmy, do you want to see gun controls, or are you suggesting you want to see a change in the American Constitution?
I know, right? I wish it would be the latter, but I am a very...
Timmy, it's not going to happen, is it?
Idealist. Right, I'm a realist at the same time. I'd like to balance that, but definitely gun control. It is logical. It is a no-brainer. You know, someone with a knife or a truck won't be able to harm as many people in such a short amount of time. I think it's a no-brainer for me, and it's shameful that we're still dealing with this. I have a 10-year-old, and whenever I take him to the movie theaters or anywhere where there's a lot of people, I subconsciously check for an exit sign and wonder what I would do if somebody started shooting ammunition that are fit for a war zone. Come on.
Interesting point, Timmy, that's being made to me by text, and it's this. When something like this happens in the US, gun sales go up in the immediate aftermath as people think they need to arm themselves to protect their family. So more guns enter the system, and with more guns, there are probably going to be more killings. So, I mean, do you see that, Timmy, that people in America might actually say, do you know what, we better go and buy a gun to protect ourselves?
There is this obsession with guns that has to stop. It's becoming just, you know, collecting toys, and then there's a thin line between protecting yourself. There's a thin line between beginning the conversation to talk about, you know, how do we disarm the bad people? How do we disarm people who are not fit enough to use it? And then it's something else to go ahead and just get more. It's a drug. I think it's very dangerous to keep going this
Timmy,
way.
You've made your point very strongly. Thank you, Timmy, an American, very frustrated. She wants to see reform, but it isn't really happening. Guns or no guns, if people are intent, they will always find a way to suppress, frighten, or kill by whatever means they can. Interesting idea here from Anthony on Twitter. He says, gun control is never going to happen in the States. Bullet control is the answer. No stockpiling. The trouble there, Anthony, actually, is you can make your own rounds relatively easily. It's not even actually that expensive to do. I wonder what Nigel, who's calling from Wallingford, thinks of this debate. Good evening.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. Good to talk to you. I'm actually a wildlife manager. We use guns for our living. We also use guns. I do a lot of clay shooting, etc. Horrified what's going on in America. I think the NRA's got a lot to blame for this. I think in this country, as you know, we have the firearm certificate and the shotgun certificate, which is fairly well, if it's adhered to properly, served us very well. We have to go through loops and hurdles, and I think that's great, because I think with a firearm, I mean, I've just used my firearm half an hour ago to cull some deer. There's a responsibility with that. They're lethal weapons, and for somebody to get an AR-15, sit up on a hotel room, and he had an armory of weapons, you couldn't have stopped that in 10 minutes. There's no way. And it's just horrific what's happened, and I really think Bush...
I mean, if he was firing, Nigel, if he was firing one round at a time, he could still have killed a lot of people, but he'd have got to a lot more quickly, wouldn't he?
Well, this is the problem. He's got an AR-15. I guess he's obviously got a semi-auto and auto. And I read the American gun magazines, and I've also met a couple of American hunters, and I'm just aghast at them. They're just, frankly speaking, gung-ho. We've got good ethos in this country. There are a few guys that I do worry about in this country, but on the whole, the shooting community...
So, Nigel, we've got it right, but did it make sense for Tony Blair to ban handguns in totality?
Oh, this is a very difficult one. I'm not...
we'll leave it.
It's a knee-jerk reaction. I think what the compromise should have been, I think guys should have been able to leave their handgun at clubs just for that one.
At clubs, right. OK, Nigel Wallingford, a practiced gun user, making the point. He's been out today, firing rifles. We have a good system of regulation in this country. He thinks America ought to do the same. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and... As we discuss the Las Vegas massacre and ask ourselves, is it time perhaps America had some more controls on the sale of guns, in particular the automatic repeating high-velocity rifles? Another distressing incident, not on the same scale, but difficult not to look at what happened in Barcelona and the rest of Catalonia yesterday. Quite extraordinary. Now, it may well be that the Catalan government didn't have legal national authority to have a referendum on separation, and it may well be they pushed ahead quite deliberately, wanting to confront the Spanish government, but I think the reaction was extraordinary. Over 800 people injured, and police trying to stop people entering polling stations, grabbing women by the hair, old women with gashes on their heads, rubber bullets being fired. I mean, quite extraordinary scenes to try and stop a vote from happening. And what is the response of the European Commission been, well, Mr Juncker said it was very important that the rule of law was enforced and the referendum was illegal. Today, he said, Mr Juncker, he's in listening mode to the debate that's going on in Spain, and the official statement says that if Catalonia was to vote for secession, then they would have to leave the European Union. You know, we've even had a Vice President of the European Parliament today describing what happened in Catalonia yesterday as an attempted coup against Europe. So basically, what the EU is saying is the way the Spanish government have behaved is absolutely fine, that it's their decision that Catalonia must stay part of this wonderful, loyal EU member, Spain. Can you imagine if some sort of pro-EU protesters, and we've seen a few of them since the referendum, but if a few pro-EU protesters were seen to have been roughed up mildly by the Metropolitan Police, they'd be calling us a terrible third world country. The fact that nobody from the European Commission has spoken out in condemnation of this police violence says to me an awful lot about what will happen in the future in the European Union if you're a dissenter. We'll probably debate that in full at some point over the course of the next few weeks. And the online auction I've been talking about, for those that have listened, you've got the chance, if you want, to have a private lunch with me at Franco's Italian restaurant in central London, and we're raising money for Global's Make Some Noise charity. And the idea is to help youngsters and their families living with illness, disability, or a lack of opportunity. You might have heard Nick Ferrari talking, for example, about this money being used to help with liver transplants for young people. If you want to play this game, if you fancy lunch with me, it'll be on a Friday. I won't be broadcasting in the evening. We'll do it properly. It'll be fun. To do it, to bid, go to lbc.co.uk, and we're taking these bids online until 7:45 on Thursday the 5th of October. You've got to be 18 to enter, and you'll see all the conditions, terms and conditions, when you go to lbc.co.uk. Currently, the highest bid in to have lunch with me for the Make Some Noise charity is £3,300, which you may say is a bit much. Alternatively, if that's completely out of your price range, then you can buy tickets to watch me on stage instead, because on Wednesday the 10th of January I'll be appearing at the Hippodrome Casino in London, and again it's in aid of Global's Make Some Noise charity. Tickets vary, minimum price is £85. Again, if you fancy that, you can go to lbc.co.uk. Now, I keep reading that the name Nigel is disappearing completely, and indeed there was in the Sun newspaper today a woman with a young baby, and she said they called him Nigel. Could he be the last one ever? But we've had one on the show tonight. We got another one. We got Nigel in Guildford, who's going to tell us whether he thinks, in the wake of Las Vegas, America needs tighter gun controls. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. We have spoken before about arming British police. That's another subject, obviously.
Obviously, although I must say, Nigel, one that I feel very strongly about. But there we are.
I remember that conversation. Yeah. A couple of things. I think the high magazine capacity issue is a red herring in a lot of ways, because I'm looking at what happens in Europe and the clubs I belong to in France, and I own guns with high capacity magazines, as it happens.
Right. Okay.
And you quite rightly said, you can, even if you fired from a 10-shot magazine and you had 10 of them, you can fire off 100 rounds relatively rapidly until your gun jams. Or you've got 3 or 4 30-round magazines, and the same effect would be as far as mayhem and killing people. I think what the Americans ought to do, all right, they're not going to get over this right to bear arms aspect, I don't think.
No.
But the European licensing model is completely different. To own a gun, in especially a Category B weapon in France, which is semi-automatic, or a revolver or 7-minute pistol, you have to have a license. So to get a license, you've got to belong to a club. You have to have a medical test. You also have a 24-question safety test. And then if you belong to a club, you can buy a weapon, semi-automatic weapon, but they will watch you shoot as well. So my argument is, couldn't the Americans adopt a similar process? So you've still got the sort of right to bear arms, So they're not saying you can't bear arms, but
you have to prove you're competent to bear them, yeah?
Yeah, so you have a longer process. So you could still say, yeah, I've got the right, but there must be a psychological profile of these killers. There must be one by now. You know, all these big mass murders, Columbine, they must have looked at these people and their backgrounds and established whether there is a pattern.
Right. So this is one area, Nigel, in which the Europeans have got things right and the Americans have got things wrong, yeah?
Yeah, because you notice there's only been really one bad massacre in Europe, which was the Norwegian one, wasn't it, on that island, I think. Pretty much.
Yes.
But they don't have mass killings with weapons that I would hold, or French people I know hold. They don't go around killing people, which you could quite just as easy. So there's something in American psychology somewhere that they must have tapped by now. But then this process, if you use the European process, it would weed these people out.
No, Nigel, you're again another experienced gun user making the point that, you know, handguns, etc., you know, you can buy them in France, you can use them in France, but you've got to go through a process to prove that you're competent and of sound mind. When gun shootings become a weekly occurrence in your country, then a change of constitution is obvious, I get by text. Well, it may be obvious to you, but I don't think it's obvious to America. I don't even think the idea of the constitution changing is even a starter. Letting police carry guns is fine, Nigel. Having civilians carrying around machine guns is just plain stupid. America needs tough gun control and fast. Sean in Manchester is calling. He's never called before. Sean, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay. What do you think? What should be done?
Just this idea around the Constitution just being set in stone and not being able to change. You've got to bear in mind it came about at a time when people were armed with flintlock rifles. They weren't considering, 100 years in the future that you would have weapons that could fire, 30 rounds in a very short space of time. But like a previous contributor said, I don't think America's unfortunately ready to change that. And then, no matter how many schools shootings there are, incidents like there were last night, I can't see that changing, unfortunately. But something does need to change.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, Sean, the constitutional debate about change in America over guns is a dead duck. It ain't going to happen. But I do think that some of the arguments that Obama, as I said, I've never been a fan of Obama, but I thought on this he was right. Some of the arguments Obama was making about some degree of regulation probably is the sensible approach. And my guess is that we'll begin to see a bit of that debate happening in some states.
It's quite surprising, really. I don't really agree with you on much, but on this subject, I agree completely with you. It's I don't know. I don't understand this psyche of. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've shot before, and clay pigeon shooting, target shooting, and things like that. But I don't get this idea of why somebody needs an arsenal in the garage or in the basement.
It's very difficult, Sean. It's very difficult for people who are part of one culture to understand why somebody in a different culture has a different attitude towards guns. I mean, I know Americans who cannot believe that we go to pubs and stand up and drink beer and drink more than they would drink in the space of 3 months. I mean, there are all sorts of cultural differences that take place. And I think most British people are a little bit mystified by American gun culture. Do you visit America, Sean, on a regular basis or not?
No, not on a regular basis. I've got family and friends in North America and things like that. And, they're similar opinion as myself. I've got other friends who do shoot and things like that. I've got no issues with that. But I just one other point was the army of regular constables in this country.
Yes,
we're probably going. If we did go down that route, are we going to see those regular constables going through the same kind of training that firearms officers go through? If those regular constables, once they're, licensed,
I think, Sean, the answer to that The answer to that is that those regular constables would probably, when I talk about arming the police, most of them would at least carry a taser, all right? When it comes to carrying a gun, I would expect, very high standards indeed. Sean, I thank you for your call. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:46.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
After several announcements at the Conservative conference designed to woo young voters, are the Tories now running scared of Jeremy Corbyn?
Clive Bull on LBC.
The Renault scrappage scheme is now on. You could save thousands on a brand new Renault. So say au revoir to your old car. Model exclusions apply. Eligibility criteria apply. Visit renault.co.uk/scrappage.
Zingflowers.com. Fresh hand-tied bouquets with easy online ordering. Zing Flowers. Amazing every time.
So, the brilliant new iPhone's finally here. But which network do you go for? What if you could get one that lets you keep any data you haven't used? Or change your plan whenever you want? New Sky Mobile. With the new iPhone. Now there's an idea. The perfect network for your perfect phone. Sky. Believe in better.
Redeem data per 1 gigabyte and use within 3 years. 12-month minimum term. Downgrades effective month following selection.
The Carpet Right 7-day flash sale with 50% off a choice of floors and beds, plus free credit and nothing to pay for 6 months. Ends Tuesday, 8 p.m. Representative 0% APR minimum spend applies.
Ooh, glad I brought a coat. Thinking ahead, Wilbur?
Huh?
Well, it's like getting home care from British Gas before winter catches you out. From only £12 a month, that's less than 40p a day. Your boiler's serviced every year. If it still breaks down, we'll fix it. And until 23rd of October, you get 1 month free on most home care products when you buy online. You brought the umbrella. Thinking ahead. Not bad for a penguin. Stay a step ahead of winter. Search British Gas Home Care. Conditions apply.
Dad always looked out for me. From checking for monsters under the bed, to telling me that Brian was a loser when he finished with me. He even looked out for me when he passed away last year. Turns out he'd already organised everything, so I didn't have to.
A prepaid funeral plan from the Co-op covers all the costs of your chosen burial or cremation plan, so your loved ones will never be met with any surprise bills. Funeral care, the Co-op way. Call or visit us online.
When you run your own business, being in the right place at the right time can make all the difference. And as the UK's #1 commercial vehicle brand, we understand this too. That's why at the Ford Transit Show live event, we'll give you a free sat-nav when you purchase a new commercial vehicle, so your business can be in the right place at the right time, every time. Visit your nearest Ford dealer between the 7th and 15th of October. Ford. Together, we go further.
The free entry-level satellite navigation system available across the Transit range, excluding Base and Tornado series vehicles, to be contracted between the 7th and 15th of October 2017 and registered between the 7th of October 2017 and 30th of June 2018. Offer available to retail and eligible fleet customers only at participating Ford dealers. Not available with any other promotions.
Who's Off helps you to easily manage your staff leave, holiday and sickness, no matter what your company size. Start your free trial today at who'soff.com.
This is LBC, live from Strasbourg, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Does America need more gun controls in the wake of this appalling Las Vegas massacre? And your texts and tweets coming in at a rapid rate. You're wasting your time up against the National Rifle Association. A comment there that no reform of any kind is going to happen. Of course more control is needed. The current gun culture is ludicrous. Why does the average Joe on the street need a gun with 20 rounds? The longer this continues, the more Americans will die. Hi, Nigel. I can't understand how members of the general public in the US have ever been allowed access to firearms that fire multiple rounds. What will they be used for? And if the defence is they want to use them for hunting, does not that take away the skill from the sport? Yes, 100%. You know, people who go deer culling or whatever, I mean, in this country, you know, they wouldn't expect to fire off a whole series of rounds. They would make sure they got it right and did the job properly, cleanly, and as humanely as possible with a single shot. I can't see any defence for being able to buy high-velocity assault hunting rifles that have a semi-automatic or fully automatic capacity and can fire multiple rounds. I can't see an argument for it. I really, really can't. Andy is calling from Vera in Spain. Andy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing okay. I mean, I look at this debate, and I think sometimes it's quite difficult to talk about America because it is a different culture. But I do think there will be some debate after what's happened in Las Vegas, don't you?
Well, I think there has to be. I don't understand how they can keep ignoring the problem for as long as they have done. They've got to change it.
Yeah, I mean, the figures, I don't know whether you were listening earlier, Andy, but the figures, 11,500 people have died so far this year in America as a result of guns, accidents, etc., murders. And by the way, I didn't tell you this earlier, 23,000 people have been injured by guns in America this year. They're big numbers, aren't they?
Well, can you imagine the reaction if that happened in Europe? It just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't. Something would change.
No, all that happens in Europe, Andy, is the Spanish police beat up people who want to vote in Catalonia, I'm tempted to say, but it's of a different magnitude, isn't it? What are the gun laws in Spain like, Andy?
I think they're pretty much the same as they are in England, apart from the fact that the police have guns on the streets.
Yes. The police have guns, but it's licensing. I think this is an area, I think the whole of Europe basically has got this better than America, that you need to go through a test, you've got to prove you're of sound mind, etc. No, I really, really do. And do you think, you do think, do you, that now a proper debate will spark in America?
Well, I doubt it will, but I wish it would. I think there's too much money involved in. I think there's too much money involved in it, where the NRA are paying lobbyists to maintain the status quo because it keeps people rich. I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think that people need the guns at all. The Second Amendment says that they have the right to bear arms in a well-regulated militia, but these people aren't in a militia. They're just lone peoples that have guns because they like to have guns, and they don't like to admit that that's why they have guns, but that's why they do. There's no reason why they need it. The Second Amendment was written to give people a chance to fight back against the government if there was ever a reason to do so. But now the government have tanks and helicopters and aeroplanes, and these guns, however powerful they are, they're never going to be able to stand up against the government.
But Americans do still see that.
Well,
Americans do. They see it as a liberty and a right, Maybe it won't change, Andy. Thank you for your points. Andy's probably right. It's difficult to see much changing in the wake of this, I think. The perpetrators will always have guns. Therefore, the good guys should have them too, says Les in Eltham. Les, we're not saying that the good guys and girls shouldn't be able to have guns. What we are saying is perhaps there ought to be a rather better series of checks before they're actually allowed to own them and use them. I think that's what we're saying. The NRA are so powerful in America that any politician that has ideas on gun control gets discredited. Change will not happen, says Mark. Alec is calling me from West Byfleet, another new caller to the show. Alec, what are your views on this?
Yeah, hi Nigel. I'm a businessman who travels to the US on a reasonably regular basis, and I talk to people who, let's just say, they're in a higher part of society. They're capable of spending $100,000 plus on art, and talking to these people who've lived in America all their lives. There is an inherent paranoia in America as a society, which I think you could put all the gun controls in the world on American society, but you have to eradicate the paranoia. It's a dead end. It's a brick wall. I was speaking to a client only 2-3 months ago, and these are very sensible, very intelligent people, but they're scared of the next door neighbor. They're scared of the next door neighbor because they're not from America, or they're not from somewhere that, they don't know who they are. So they go and buy a gun. So and that's the instant thing that they go and do. They don't go and knock on the door and give them a cake. They go down the shop and they buy a gun. There is an inherent paranoia in America. It's deep and it's in depth in their culture. And I think you could put the NRA, it's just an affront. It's a PR machine. you'll have these people with or without the NRA. They will buy a gun because they are paranoid and scared. And
so there's no change coming in your view, then, Alec?
No,
yeah,
not at all. Not at all. I don't think at all.
No.
The chap that shot from the window. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Listen, I have to say, I think in many ways you're right. I think there'll be more of a debate, but fundamental change isn't coming quickly. Alec, I thank you for your observations from the time you spent in America. Nigel, what if you simply like firing guns of various types at gun ranges? Would you ban that? No, I don't want to ban anything. I'm not suggesting that. And I have been to gun ranges in America and shot guns, as I have in this country. One of the points that was made earlier was in terms of sort of handguns, for argument's sake. When Blair banned them completely, maybe if gun clubs have been allowed to keep them, that might have been a more sensible compromise. I'm not for banning guns, but I do think a degree of regulation actually makes a little bit of sense. And my last caller on this subject this evening is going to be James, who's calling from York. James, hello.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. It's a very quick, simple point.
Yep.
Guns are a tool, okay? Social media is a tool. Before social media, there was no abuse on social media. Alcohol is a tool. Without alcohol, you do not get you don't get issues. Okay, I know people enjoy themselves, but you get problems with alcohol. But the point is about guns. They're the most deadliest tool of all. Okay, you can have all the checks in the world, but occasionally, I'm not saying every time someone gets in a bad mood, they're going to grab a gun and go do something with it. But the point is, without the access to the tool, then you will not have the problem. You'll completely eradicate it. So it seems to me...
So make the access more difficult, yeah?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love Donald Trump. I love yourself. I agree with all the Southern, I love America, what they're doing. But it's one thing I just think they need to come on into the 21st century.
All right, James, powerful point to end. I will say as my final thought, and I'll be a bit negative here, I don't think anything can change. There are already 100 million guns out there in houses in America. Even if you do put controls on people buying repeating assault rifles, which I personally think you probably should, actually, it isn't going to make much difference because there's an awful lot of that stuff out there already. I don't think anything fundamental will change in the wake of this terrible, terrible massacre. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to be in the European Parliament where, for the first time, fully and properly, since Article 50 was triggered, there is going to be a full debate here tomorrow, Juncker, Barnier, Verhofstadt and the crew, and where there will also be votes taking place at lunchtime tomorrow on the direction of Brexit and how much money they think that we ought to cough up. Somebody has now bid £4,000 for the charity lunch with me, so that's progress there. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow at 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. So, coming up at 9, it's the Business Hour. I'm going to be joined by business expert Emma Jones, here to help you if you're...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.